Okay, we're going to get started. It is noon. Thanks everybody for joining us for September Lunch and Learn. Do want to give a shout out. September is Kinship Care Month. So we hope that everyone is thanking a kinship caregiver or thanking a kinship professional for all that they do during Kinship Care Month. Today we have a very special guest, Kimberly Polstein, who I know from many years ago. At our internship, so she'll tell you a little bit more about herself in just a minute. But today's topic is understanding children's stress, and I'm going to give Kimberly the majority of the time here. So I'm going to blow through some slides quickly. Note about the Lunch and Learn series. This is put on by the Kin Care Coalition and the Kinship Navigator. This is, I don't know, the 8th or 9th that we've done so far this year. You can see, and this PowerPoint slide will go out to everybody at the end. So all these links will work for all of you when you get the PowerPoint slide, but we have many other topics that we've done. The next Lunch and Learn is going to be Thursday, October 21st. So that's the third Thursday of October. And tentatively, the alternative dispute resolution folks will be giving a presentation. So we look forward to that. So definitely check out the next Lunch and Learn. You'll see many links to RSVP over the next couple of weeks. I'm Ryan Johnson, the Associate Director with the Kinship Navigator, the co-chair of the Kin Care Coalition. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the Kinship Navigator and then pass it over to Kimberly and she can take it from there. So the Kinship Navigator, many of you know, is information, referral, education, and advocacy. You can check out our website for a lot of our legal fact sheets on how to help kinship caregivers do things like access birth certificates or enroll children in school or sign up for benefits. So the Kinship Navigator is a really great resource for information for kinship caregivers and professionals who are helping them. We do operate a helpline Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So please give us a call. We do educational events like this in partnership with the Kin Care Coalition. We have a massive online video archive at this point, so you can check out the Navigator website or our YouTube page for many more videos. We do partner with local case management programs, permanency resource centers, OCFS funded kinship case management programs. We refer caregivers out to support groups and other legal resources throughout the state. So be sure to check out the Navigator website. Here's the website address and our helpline number. If a caregiver is going to call the Kinship Navigator, we want to make sure that they're getting access to financial assistance. We want them to know what their legal options are, and we want to refer them to services. So obviously, we are here for kinship caregivers, but we're also here for professionals who need to know more information about kinship care in order to help somebody. So please don't hesitate to give us a call. We serve about 3,000 to 4,000 callers every year through our helpline. So definitely check that out. This is our website. It's pretty straightforward, but I like to show it to folks to make sure you're comfortable with what's going on the Kinship Navigator website. Our helpline numbers in the upper left-hand corner. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see you can chat live with an agent. We're happy to send you the information you need through our chat. And right across the middle there is where you're going to find online educational access to a lot of our videos. Legal resources is going to be a lot of our informational fact sheets, so check that out. And county resources, we are a resource for all 62 counties in New York State. We do provide virtual case assistance in a number of counties, so it's a little bit more intensive than our typical kind of information and referral helpline service. If you have a caregiver from one of the listed counties here, you have access to a case assistant. You can be the kinship caregivers will have someone who can hold their hand through the process of applying for benefits or getting referred to a local resource for up to 6 months. So check out the list here of what counties are here, and we're happy to get virtual case assistance going for caregivers in your county. The best way to get caregivers to the Kinship Navigator is through the permission to contact form. It's available on our homepage, so be sure to check it out. Again, this PowerPoint slide is going to be going out, so you can check it out at this link right here. We ultimately want caregivers to find out about kinship services, kinship benefits that are available to them. So if you're a professional, you're working with a kinship caregiver, utilize the permission to contact form to send caregivers our way, or give them our telephone number or website address. We'll happily help anybody we can. So this is what everybody came for. Kimberly Polstein is an LMSW and the Director of Mental Health at Brightside Up, which is a local child care resource and referral agency dedicated to providing expert resources to the capital region in order to improve the availability and quality of child care and to assist families in finding child care. She's also a mental health consultant working with the development of early childhood education programming. Her email address is here if you have questions. The chat box is also going to be open. So if you have questions along the road here, please don't hesitate to ask. I will be monitoring the chat and make sure that Kim sees that when those things come up. So Kim, please take over.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, so like Ryan said, I'm the Director of Mental Health Services with Brightside Up, and I'll just give you a little overview of what we do and what mental health consultation is, because it's a little bit different than mental health counseling, and it's a little bit different than some of the direct services that you might have heard of with working with children. So Brightside Up is a CCR&R, child care resource and referral agency, and sort of like the Kinship Navigator, where there's information, education, advocacy, and referral. We do a lot of those same things. So we have referral for child care. We provide information on child development, child care. My work is really with the social emotional aspect of children's development, as well as trauma and ACEs. So trauma and ACEs are weirdly near and dear to my heart. I'm one of those nerdy folks who likes to read about this stuff when I'm home by the pool. But it's something that I find really important, and it is one of the topics that I train most on. I'm currently working with the Office of Children and Family Services, our governing CCR&R, the Early Care and Learning Council, and the LaSalle Institute here in Albany to roll out a 4-year, 4-part trauma and behavior series for childcare providers. So that's pretty cool. I'm excited to be working on that. We also have early educators, infant toddler specialists, dietitians, registered nurses. We work with the child and adult food program. So there's a lot going on here. You can check us out on our website, brightsideup.org, if you're interested in any of that. My department, like I said, oversees the social and emotional development of young children. So I'm working with early childhood mental health consultants, which I also do that, and infant and toddler mental health consultants, which I'm dabbling in a little bit. And really, we call ourselves the little MH. So if we're thinking about the world of mental health, some of you might be thinking about therapy. We refer to that as the big MH, right? So that's our more clinical work, working directly with a person on their own stuff. My job as a consultant is to work with a child care provider or a parent to help them best understand child development and how they can build their capacity to hold space for their children or the children in their care, to understand their development, and then to provide best practices for childcare. So I'm working with the adults, but a little bit on their own self-care practices and how some of their own culture experiences, maybe their own trauma and ACEs, might play into how they're providing care for young children. But I don't provide them therapeutic services. We also don't work directly with young children. So we'll refer out for that, and we'll work with early intervention. We'll work with the Committee of Preschool Special Education to make sure that children are getting the resources that they need. But our role is to really help the adults build their capacity. So today we are talking about trauma and ACEs. And like I said, that's one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'll give you just like a brief little trigger warning. We're not going to dive deep into anything, any graphic examples of trauma or anything like that. But we know from the research that about 1 in 5 adults have experienced some sort of traumatic event in their lifetime. And often when we're talking about trauma and ACEs, it might bring up some of that, some of the feelings in your body. So your heart might race, your palms might sweat. You might be like, oh my gosh, she's talking right about me and I didn't even know. So just a forewarning that some of those body feelings might come up for you today as we start to talk a little bit about what trauma is and how it affects young children's development. We're not going to ask anyone to share anything about themselves. I won't be sharing any personal experiences or any graphic experiences, but we're going to focus strictly on how the brain works. But just a forewarning that sometimes that might happen, and a really simple trick to kind of ground down is to take some deep breaths or to grab a pen and paper and either take some notes or doodle. So that kind of repetitive body movement helps our brain to refocus on the here and now and stay out of the there and then. So just a simple little trick for you all. And I'm gonna just get my slides to work. There we go. So I'm gonna start with a short video from the Center for the Developing Child. This is through Harvard. They have a ton of resources. So if this video is interesting to you, there's a whole web page that goes along with it, and there's 8 or 9 other videos. I think there's a whole lot. So this is a short, about 2-minute video that's just going to introduce us to the idea of toxic stress, and then we'll break that down a little bit more together.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
All right. So that link is also in the chat box, and it's the Center on the Developing Child with Harvard. There we go. So you'll also find this information on that site. There's a search function, so you can just put in trauma and ACEs, but otherwise it would be under the science tab under toxic stress. So this is also a handout on that site. It might have gone out to you. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember if I sent it ahead of time. But we're going to just look at the 3 different types of stress that the video kind of touched upon. So the most important thing I think to understand is that stress is not the enemy, right? Stress is something that we all need in order to do anything, really. We wouldn't really get a whole lot done. So for example, there's a certain level of stress that you have in order to go to work, right? You have to pay your bills. So you go to work to earn money so that you can pay your bills. That's some stress. And for some of us, that might be positive stress. For some of us, that might be more tolerable stress. For folks who live in what we call extreme poverty, that could be a contributing factor to toxic stress. So whenever we talk about trauma, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. I'll explain that in just a minute. We know that there's a little bit of a continuum, and that trauma is a subjective experience, so it's not the same for everyone. But we need a certain level of stress in order to just have daily function. So stress is not the enemy, and there's a little bit of a difference between stress and stressors. So a stressor might be your job or a boss or a global pandemic. Those things are stressors, and they lead to the types of stress responses that we feel in our bodies. So the way that I like to think about it is a stressor is the thing that causes the stress, which is a hormonal shift in my body. I might not be able to do something about the stressor. I might always have an annoying boss. But I have to do something with the stress in order to stay healthy. So I would maybe go for a walk or go for a run or do some journaling, or maybe I would push into that big MH space and use some therapeutic resources in order to help myself thrive. So when we're thinking about stress, we can kind of break it down into 3 general buckets. And I'm just going to grab my laser pointer here. So the first is that positive stress. This is where we have a normal stress response. Our hands might feel a little sweaty or sometimes you get a little cold because all the blood rushes to your major organs. You might feel your heart rate increase. You might feel that nervous energy before a big talk, or maybe you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm starting a new job, or the first day of school. All of those kind of things activate the normal stress response in our body, which typically shuts back down once our brain realizes that we're safe. Very short time period, super time limited, doesn't cause a whole lot of damage to our bodies. Tolerable stress, however, is when the body's alert system is activated. Now we're pushing into the fight or flight. There's actually 3. So there's fight, flight, which are mobilization responses. We want to do something about this. Or the freeze response, which is an immobilization shutdown response, where our body is too overwhelmed by the stress. The tolerable stress response can cause some damage to our system, but doesn't often, because these are typically buffered by social supports and a shorter time limit. So for example, for some of us, the COVID-19 pandemic was tolerable. So I'll use myself as an example here. I'm lucky enough and privileged enough to have a career where I was able to transition and work from home. So there were many days where I was experiencing fight, flight, freeze. I was definitely like, holy cow, where's the toilet paper? Let's get some canned soup just in case. Feeling that kind of flipped lid, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what to do. But it was tolerable stress because it was buffered by a strong social support network and the financial security of being able to take my whole career and shift it to my living room and not really have that disruption in my financial status. For some people, it caused what we call toxic stress, where there wasn't enough of that buffer to really help the body relieve itself of the stress response. When we're talking about toxic stress, this is more frequent, ongoing trauma, abuse, neglect, extreme poverty, domestic violence, drug use in the home. Those kind of things lead to what we call toxic stress. And you can see that this is the strong, frequent, and prolonged adversity. And what makes it toxic is that there's no adequate support for the person to be able to bounce back. So the body's response system stays activated and the floodgates of stress hormone stays on, rather than being able to say, here's a little bit of stress hormone, survive this one moment, turn it back off, recover. It's kind of just on high alert all the time. And this can happen to us as adults. It can also happen to us as children. So when we're thinking about young children, this is just a very simplified, very simplified idea of how our brain functions. I also have a little stuffed animal brain here that I can use to kind of link both of these things together. So when we're born, our brain is developed from the back to the front, from the bottom to the top, and from the inside out. So at the bottom here in the back is our survival brain. That's our cerebellum that really control our brainstem. It's all of those automatic functionings that we don't put any thought into, like digestion, blinking, breathing. Most of our body movements are all kind of housed in the back of the brain, in our survival brain. Its only function is to keep us alive. Then in the middle parts, in here, but on the inside, we have this emotion brain piece. That's our limbic system. You might hear words like hippocampus and amygdala, all of that kind of live in that emotion brain. That starts to develop as we're young. But our logic brain, this squiggly part that you see on the outside of a brain, is way up at the top, including our frontal lobe, which is up where this little guy's eyes are. That's the part of the brain that houses all of our logic and reasoning. So our ability, if we're thinking about young children, to sit and listen, to follow directions, to raise their hand before they speak, all of that lives up in our logic brain to make really good decisions. You can see on the side here, I have 25 plus. This part of our brain is not fully developed until we're adults. So it always makes me giggle when we're thinking about teenagers and we ask them to like, act like an adult. I'm like, their logic brain's not even fully developed. They can't fully do that yet because that part of their brain's just not fully cooked yet. So this little diagram just can look a little confusing all at once. So I'm going to start on my left-hand side, the arrow with the ages. Our survival brain is fully developed at birth. And as we grow, we move up into developing the middle parts of our brain and the top parts of our brain. So like I said, our logic brain is not fully developed until we're about between 25 and 28 years old. Our logic brain functions best on the right-hand side under low stress. So I've also kind of color-coded this. So I'm going to go back one slide for a second. In positive stress, when we're not really experiencing a great deal of stress, we see this blue color. We're functioning mostly in our logic brain. We can think through our actions, we can think through our decisions and make good choices in our logic brain. As our stress increases, as we experience more tolerable stress and more toxic stress, we function lower and lower in our brain. So as our stress level increases, our brain functioning sort of not decreases, but we move into different parts of our brain. So when we're experiencing ongoing toxic stress, when a child is raised in a home that is chaotic or that doesn't provide them the physical and psychological safety that they need to fully develop, then they might be functioning more from their survival brain than their logic brain. So we might see more impulsive behavior. We might see children who are appearing to be more aggressive, or who sometimes the child care providers will call them the runners. The ones who are not necessarily behaving the same way as some of their peers, it could be because they're functioning from a different part of their brain. It's sort of like when you go to the gym, if you're only working out your arms will get really big, but your legs will stay really skinny. These parts of their brain are being used most often when they're living in high stress. So these parts of their brain are the most developed, which means this part of their brain develops much less. They're making a lot less neural connections. So these are our neurons. In the first 3 years of life, we have huge amounts of brain growth, just multiplying those neural connections. And when we're putting all of that energy down here, it doesn't leave a lot of room to grow the logic brain. So it's really important that we understand helping children to regulate their experiences and their emotions, which we can talk about another time. I'm happy to come back and do more on some of the what to do with it. Today, we're really just sort of understanding how the brain works. But if we're helping children to move from a survival place to a more emotional space, then we can help them move into a more of a logic space. It might feel a little like doom and gloom, but I'll show you one slide at the end that'll help us figure out how to balance that. So when our body is experiencing high levels of stress, you'll see, well, you won't see, but you'll feel it in your body. The stress hormones associated with fight, flight, freeze, or cortisol and adrenaline. You might have heard of adrenaline before, but maybe not cortisol. There is some linkage to diabetes and heart disease with high ACE scores, which I'll just show you on the next slide. And part of that reasoning is because our bodies are flooded with these hormones that we really don't need that much of. When we're able to have some good buffer, whether it's social support or some therapeutic intervention or just one strong social connection can really make a difference. Our brains release dopamine and serotonin, and that helps to balance these hormones out. That helps bring us back to a feeling of safety and security. So like I said earlier, trauma is subjective. Not everyone's experience of trauma will be the same. The definition that I like most for what trauma is a sudden, unpredictable, body-based event that overwhelms your ability to cope. So really, when we're thinking about what trauma is, it's an event that overwhelms the nervous system so that your brain kind of moves into a place of just trying to survive. You may have heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. That's the ACE study. That really just showed us some good research that basically what it said is that trauma is common across all age groups and demographics. Trauma does not discriminate. So at some point, we will all experience something that our bodies deem traumatic, whether it's traumatic for the person next to you or not. And I just want to end on this little note that we're looking at high risk and not destiny. So if this is bringing up like, oh, shoot, she's talking about me, I've had a lot of trauma in my life, my poor brain is functioning from a different place. I just want to highlight that just because there's high risk in your life does not mean that there is destined to be problems. There are plenty ways to buffer against it. And so when our scales are kind of tipped towards risk, we can add some protective factors in, like a strong social support network, reaching out to friends, using the resources available to you to help gain some financial stability, and be able to join some of those support groups and talk to other people who may be experiencing the same things you might be experiencing. And that helps us balance out with some more protective factors, which then in turn helps our brain grow that front part, that logic center. And the slide that I just love to fully end on is this cute little quote. The human capacity for burden is like bamboo. It's far more flexible than you'd ever believe at first. And we could just leave it at first. I think sometimes we think of humans as big, strong oak trees, but oak trees, if you give them enough of a push, they'll eventually fall over. And I like to think of us more like bamboo, where we can really withstand some heavy winds and some heavy storms. So even though there might be some heavy risk in your life, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to snap or break or fall over. There's plenty of ways to balance that back out with some protective factors. And so, Ryan, we've got about 2 minutes left, and I have not been looking at the chat. So I want to make sure if there's any questions that we can answer those. Oh, and my slide got a little weird there. It says thank you.
Probably my fault. Sorry.
No, I think it's our font. We have a very specific font, so sometimes it blows out on other people's computers.
Fair. It doesn't look like we have any additional chat questions at this time. I wanted to say thank you so much for coming and presenting to our group. 25 minutes flies by when it's really great information like you've presented to us today. So a little teaser, Kim and I were talking before this. There's the potential for some additional information for everybody. We can make this into a series. So certainly give us your feedback. We want to hear more about what would be helpful to you. So thank you so much. Kim just put her email in the chat. So if you want to check that out and reach out to her directly, you can do that. Kim, again, thank you so much for presenting to our group here today. Looking forward to some partnership with you in the future.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, everybody.